It's time to fire this thing up.
Welcome aboard ShipShape TV Essentials. This is your port of call for the most impactful upgrades, expert advice, and hands-on solutions from seasons past. This episode is proudly brought to you by Harehold, because anything worth doing is worth doing bright. From cleaning to protecting and perfecting, Harehold has everything you need to keep your boat shining. Don't just go boating, go showboating. Now, let's hoist anchor and set a course for another exciting episode of ShipShape TV Essentials.
Screw it down. I'm getting the glass out. Hi, I'm John Greviskis. It's good to have you working around the boat with us. This is what's called an inline blower. It's for moving air, and you need to install at least one of these on your vessel if it has a gasoline-powered inboard or a gasoline-powered IO. Now, we're going to be installing one of these on our own 1966 20-foot Bertram Moppy project boat. Now, we also have a problem going on down here in the chine area of the boat. Over the years, water has somehow gotten behind the laminate and is now weeping to the surface, causing these tiny little blisters to form in our very recent Imron paint job. And we need to find out where that water's coming from, and we need to start the process of the repair. Now, we're also going to be dealing with another type of very common blister that's found on fiberglass boats. I'm talking about the ones that actually form on the bottom of the hull. So while I gather up my tools for our first project, let me throw out a proposition. Let's get you to spend the next half hour with us, and in exchange, we'll let you in on a few more ways to make your boat shipshape.
This is a real working 28-acre boatyard located in Stuart, Florida, on the shores of the Okeechobee Waterway. It's home base for ShipShape TV. This deep stretch of water connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. And now, once again, here's the host of ShipShape TV, John Greviskis.
Thanks, Buck. The first thing that we need to determine is what type of blower we're going to be installing in our project boat. Now, there are two main choices that you can decide from. The first one, like I mentioned earlier, is an inline type of blower. And where you might want to use this is if you want to be able to exhaust some fumes, say farther forward up in the boat. Well, you could attach a hose to this side of the blower. Once you engage it, you would actually be drawing those fumes through the blower. You would attach another hose to this side of the blower, and that would get attached to an exhaust vent, evacuating any fumes out of the boat. Or you have this type of blower, which is called a flange mount blower, and how it works is a little bit differently. It doesn't have the turbines in there, but rather it has a squirrel cage. And what's nice about this type of blower is it's pretty versatile where you mount it. You can mount it down into the bilge, or you can mount it up underneath a deck, or you can mount it on a bulkhead. And again, what you would do is attach a hose to the exhaust vent, and that's what's going to evacuate the chamber. And what you need to determine is how much volume you do need to evacuate from the boat. And how you do that is you need to measure your different compartments that you have on the boat. Now, in the case of the Bertram, we have three main chambers that we need to evacuate. We have this area right here where the engine is actually housed. Now, down below the bilge, it goes forward up to this fuel tank. And we also have this area back here where the batteries are kept. Now remember, batteries have corrosive vapors. They're also flammable. Those need to be exhausted as well. Now in the case of the Bertram, we're dealing with 51 cubic feet of volume that we need to move. Now the American Boat and Yacht Council recommends that you move even more air than what you have in volume. Now in the case of this Bertram, we're dealing with about 70 cubic feet per minute that we need to evacuate. And how you determine what capacity your blower has is you look at the number right on it. In the case of this one, this will move 105 cubic feet per minute. So this is plenty of power to actually exhaust out our different chambers. Let's go through the process of actually installing it. The first thing we need to do is we need to attach some sort of a screen to our two exhaust vents here. Now this is what's going to keep any mud daubers or any wasps or any little rodents from getting inside the boat. After I cut a hole in the bulkhead, I mounted the blower right to it, and then I ran the exhaust hose from the blower to the exhaust vent. Next thing I did was I ran the wiring underneath the deck, supporting it every 18 inches, and simply hooked it up to the fuse block and to the ground block. Now this is what the label reads. Warning, gasoline vapors can explode. Before starting engine, operate blower for 4 minutes and check engine compartment bilge for gasoline vapors. Even though you have a blower installed in your boat, you still need to open up the compartment and get your head down there and sniff. Your nose is your best device for detecting any fumes down there. And you diesel owners, you may want to also consider installing a blower, especially if you have a battery bank down in that engine compartment. Again, you need to get those corrosive vapors out of the boat. Well, the next thing that we need to figure out is why we have these tiny little water droplets coming off of the chine area of the boat. Now, let me rub my hand over about this 3-foot section. You can see these tiny little blisters in this new paint job. Now, what I've done is I've climbed all around the boat and I can't figure out where water is coming from. So what I've done is I've invited a friend of mine to come by today. His name is Steve Roberts and he's a fiberglass expert. Let's head over and meet him. Steve.
Hi, John.
Thanks for coming by.
It's a pleasure to be on again. Show me what's going on with this boat.
Well, you know, I recently painted this boat.
Yeah.
With a paint called Imron. And I really thought I did a top-notch job prepping the hull.
Yeah.
But look at this. I've got these tiny little blisters in the paint, Steve.
Yeah.
And it's only in the paint. It's not in the fiberglass. But I can't figure this one out. Where is this water coming from?
Well, you're obviously getting water in there somewhere. Has the boat been in the water recently?
Not for about 2 years.
Well, I think we can rule out then the water's getting in from the outside. It must somehow be getting in there from the inside. Why don't I go take a look and see if we can find where it's entering? Here it is.
What you
Yeah, I
got?
found it, John.
What you got?
The inner hull liner and the hull joint is wide open. The seam is wide open, so water is getting in there, probably by condensation. When you had the boat covered, you get water forming on the inside of the hull and dripping right down between the hull and the inner liner. And of course, it goes right down to the chine, the lowest spot, and it settles or pools right there.
So how are we going to seal this thing up? Could I use like a polyurethane adhesive?
I don't think I would, John. It might work, but I think I'd like to use fiberglass cloth tape.
Really?
It will glass it right up, glass the seam right up, and that'll add strength to the boat, and it'll also do a better job sealing it up completely.
Well, I guess the only upside to this whole thing is I used a paint that's repairable.
Yeah.
So after we do the repair, we can just touch it up. We don't have to paint the whole boat. But if we're going to be doing some fiberglass, I want to get some paper up there, and I want to start masking some stuff off.
Sure.
Why don't you start mixing up some resin?
All right.
Now, by adding some of this masking paper, it's going to somewhat protect my expensive paint job. Well, Steve, I've gone ahead and I've masked all the way forward to the bow. That seam runs from bow to stern. Now, what are we going to use material-wise?
Well, John, we're going to use a standard laminating epoxy resin 3-to-1 mix. And I'm also going to be using the biaxial 1708 cloth. I'm going to cut it in 10-inch pieces, pre-wet it so we don't have to have a real mess up in there.
Now, what do I have to do in here to prep it for the epoxy and the fiberglass?
Well, John, we're going to have to grind 2 inches above and 2 inches below that seam so we can get a nice tape right in there.
Well, I'll go get suited up.
All righty.
Steve, I'm all set for you. Everything's
John.
ready.
I'm wetting this piece out. I'll be right there. All right, I'll just place the fiberglass tabbing right in there over the seam. Get the resin on there. And lay it right in over that seam so no water can get in there. Squeegee all the air out. Take my roller, bubble roller, roll all the air out. It's as simple as that. Now I'm going to continue. I'm going to cut more pieces and continue right down the whole length of the boat.
Well, it's taken us a couple of hours to finish glassing in the seam, and now what we need to deal with is the chine area right here. Now, you might have noticed that Steve, when he was talking with you, didn't have a respirator on when he was working with this epoxy. I don't recommend that. Whenever you're in an enclosed area and you're working with this stuff, make sure that you're wearing the proper safety equipment. Steve, how are we going to open this area up?
Well, John, I'm going to use an air grinder. It's an angle grinder with a 24 grit disc. I'm going to start right here. I'm going to go slowly until we get into the water or the wet area. Once we get into that, we'll see more of what we've got. We'll dry it out, re-glass it, a little bit of filler, and touch it up with the paint. You'll never know what ever happened.
We'll have at it.
All righty. Take a look, John.
Oh my goodness, what is this?
It's a foam core, probably Cledgicel or Divinicel, but it's full of water. So we can bet that this is all full of water all the way to where your hand is. So we're going to have to grind it open, dry out this foam, and probably even remove some of it with a putty knife and glass over it.
Okay, now how long will it take to dry out?
I think once we get it open, probably at least a day.
Okay, when I first started seeing these blisters, I was really starting to get concerned, but really it's not a big deal. You know, recently I met up with a yard that specializes in a different type of blister repair. We're talking about osmotic blisters that occur on the bottom of the hull. Let's go have a look.
John, in the 60s, they started building fiberglass boats. They thought they'd found the material that would make the boats with no rot, no rust, and so we had fiberglass. In the 70s, we had blisters.
Oh, what happened?
Well,
they thought these fiberglass boats were virtually waterproof,
yeah.
But yet somehow water's getting into the boat. How's that working, John?
Well, the water actually goes right through the gel coat, which isn't waterproof, and starts into the laminate. And it starts to deteriorate the boat, and it builds up the chemicals behind the gel coat and actually causes a pool of chemicals in the backside, which forms a blister.
Should point out a blister on the boat.
On this boat, we have a blister right here, which is a bump, which is full of fluid, and it's actually pulled the gel coat and the layer of mat off the hull, which is what gives us the blister. Now, there's another way that it happens, and that would be a blister that leaked. Instead of the mat coming loose from the hull, the thing will form, the pressure will build, and the gel coat will break, and you'll have a little weeping hole here instead.
Okay, now you're telling me when it's a weeping situation, the gel coat may have been compromised in the building process. When there's actually a bubble, the gel coat's strong, but yet it's a laminating problem, right?
Well, actually, it can be both, but part of it is that the moisture gets through and does what it's going to do, and it just happens to fail in the weakest form.
Can you open that thing up and show us what's inside?
We'll give this one a try, and it's this nice yellow vinegary kind of fluid. Now, unfortunately, I think this one we're looking at looks like it was a previous repair that's failed and not an actual original blister, but it has the same effect. And this is that nasty.
You're telling me this is going to smell like
vinegar.
Like vinegar, yeah, it does. John, I understand that there are 3 stages that a blister goes through before it actually appears on the boat. What are those stages?
Well, the first stage is when the boat's brand new and it first goes into the water. It starts to absorb a little moisture through the gel coat. And if you haul it out and let it dry, it'll go away. But if you leave the boat in the water for an extended period of time, the moisture will penetrate further into the hull, and you'll end up with it saturated. And eventually that'll cause a blister to happen. At the very least, it'll cause saturation, even if blisters don't happen.
Right. Now, is there a way to prevent your boat from getting blisters?
There is a way, and that's to coat the boat with an epoxy or a vinyl ester resin in order to improve its water protection.
Now, is that only when the boat is new, or can you do this after a couple of years that you've owned this thing?
The simplest time is to do it when it's new. After that, after the boat's started to get wet, it has to be dried out in order to accomplish it. If it's still dry, if it's been in for a year, 2 years, or whatever, and it's measured with the moisture meter and it's still dry, then it can be coated. But after it reaches the point where it's no longer dry, then you have to peel the boat, remove the outside gel coat and probably the outside mat layer, and get down to relatively dry boat.
As John ties up a few loose ends, let's see what the G-Man himself looks for when buying a quality used boat.
Unfortunately, not everybody is honest when they're selling their boat. Take, for example, the condition of the gel coat. What you want to do is really examine this. Now, it may appear to be in excellent shape, but in reality, it could be severely oxidized. First thing you might want to do is take your hand and rub it over the surface of the gel coat. Now, if it feels oily, there very well may be a penetrating oil on it or some other substance that's actually masking the true condition of the boat. What you want to do in that case is ask permission from the boat owner to put just a little bit of acetone on a rag and wipe it on the hull. Now, this is going to reveal the true condition of the gel coat, and if you come over to this side of the boat, you'll see what we're really dealing with. This is a very severely oxidized boat, and you might want to demand a better price.
Where do you learn this stuff, John? Great tip.
John, this is a boat that's been peeled. This is what we call peeled. This is where we remove with this machine, which is basically a planer,
Let me take a look at that.
and we remove the gel coat and or the mat from the boat. It's adjustable for depth by the operator.
Can you show me how the machine works? I'd be very curious to see this thing actually work here.
Yes, we can do that for you. He's got a spot right down there by the keel that hasn't been done because the shoring was there. And where's the sound protection in the mast, but the vacuum cleaner takes...
The vacuum actually takes any of the dust or actually the material, sucks it all up.
Well, it sucks up the trash. So it isn't like grinding or sandblasting.
That's very quick. Now, John, where do you go from here? How do you seal up the boat after it's been peeled and dried?
Okay, after it's been peeled and dried, we go along and fair the edges where the rough edge is here from the edge of the planing in order to make it smooth transition. And then we'd start to coat the boat with epoxy. Or if it's got dents or spots or whatever, they'd be filled and faired.
How many coats of the epoxy would you put on this?
Depends on the product you use. Every one of them has a certain millage in order to give the protection, which then is determines the number of coats. In 25 mils, 12 mils to 25 mils, depending on what you're using.
After the boat has been, literally you have to kind of refair it,
Right.
building it from the outside in. You put this epoxy on. Do you use like a primer and then use a bottom paint?
That again, it depends on which material you're using. If you're using some of the epoxies, a primer isn't necessary. If it's sanded, some of the vinyl esters do need a primer. Some of the systems actually have a primer as part of the system.
Now these blisters, these osmotic blisters, these are not structurally going to hurt a boat, are they?
No, not when they're on the surface or under the gel coat and the mat.
This is mainly a cosmetic problem. It can be fixed. How long will this type of service last?
If the boat was brand new, this should last between 15 and 20 years.
Right.
If the boat is wet and you get it dry, it should go 5 to 20 years.
Now, John, how much does it actually cost to do this process?
With one that's completely done like this one, starts around $20 a square foot.
Okay, and Is this blistering, is this just something that happens down here in Florida, or is this happening all over the world?
Well, it actually happens everywhere, and it happens to most boats, though some of them don't actually show blisters, but they do absorb water. It happens quicker in the warm water, but it happens everywhere.
Okay, and when they're building a boat, maybe somebody stepping in a hull, can that aid in a blister? Does that help a blister maybe develop?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for them. Anything that the water can get through and then dissolve once it's in there behind the laminate is going to cause the blister, if it gets a blister. So anything that'll dissolve will make a blister.
But not every boat gets blisters.
Not every boat gets blisters. Some of them, the moisture actually will come back out and they'll be saturated, but they'll never blister. Some of them, the gel coat's strong enough or it's porous enough. And then some of them just don't gain enough moisture to do it.
Well, you're a professional. This is what your company does here. Real quick, take us through the step if we're going to fix a single blister. What do we need to do first?
Okay, to fix a single blister, we would start out by grinding the spot out. Now, you have to use caution because if you grind too hard or fast, the heating of the fiberglass actually will do more damage than the blister will. So you grind it out, keeping the disc cool by doing it slowly, no further than necessary. Then wash the blistered area with alcohol, acetone, and water.
And that's to get the glycol off
and everything
the blister
else.
And everything
Yeah.
else. Now, glycol will not evaporate on its own.
No, its boiling temperature is too high, so it won't evaporate. You've got to get it out of there by washing it to get it out of there.
So it's a water-soluble type of thing.
Yeah, and most of the other problems are too. So water helps. Water will help
Now,
bring any
are
of it
you
out.
using any water in this step at all? I mean, do you have to wash
No.
this boat?
We wash the boats after they're peeled. That's part of the drying process, is wash them, let them dry, wash them, and it removes the glycols and the salts and the dirt and allows it to dry.
So we washed our single blister, and then we start the process of actually filling it back in. Do we again use epoxy?
I prefer epoxy because it's less water soluble. And so with the spot, what I would do is coat the spot following the directions for the epoxy and then use a filler. Now the filler you choose depends on how much work you want to do and how long you want it to last. Body filler, like in a car, will not last for a year because it absorbs water. So a filler with micro balloons and epoxy, that'll last 5, 6, 7 years if the boat behind it is pretty dry. And if you use solid glass, cut little slips of glass and actually laminate it back, then you've got to fix it'll last as long as the boat for that spot. You may have a spot next to it next year.
Right. Well, John, I thank you. I also thank Summerfield Boat Works out here, as well as Frank Harehold from the Marine Industries Association, and naturally, my good friend, Steve Roberts. But hey, we're just about out of time. I've got to head back up the road. John, thank you again.
Okay.
Wow, what a couple of very important topics. We're talking about blowers and we're talking about osmotic blistering of the hull. Did you realize that about 90% of the boats out there today are made from fiberglass? We really need to protect these hulls from any water absorption. Well, hey, we've got a little bit of bonus time left over, and this is where we answer some of your questions, either through letters that you've written in or from emails. But can you give everybody those addresses?
Our mailing address is ShipShape TV, P.O. Box 31561, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida 33420. Or if you have internet access, the address is shipshapetv.com.
Good deal. Thanks, Buck. Today, we have a letter that was written to us from Sylvia up in Bethesda, Maryland. And Sylvia writes, "Dear John, I have a constant problem with corrosion on my battery posts and terminals. How do I get rid of it and keep the sea air from crudding it up?" Well, Sylvia, that's a good question. But it doesn't happen to only saltwater boaters like you up in Bethesda, Maryland. It also happens to a lot of freshwater boaters around the country. The corrosion does appear to look like salt, but it's not. It's actually caused from the acid inside the battery. And what you need to do is you need to get that corrosion off the post and off the connector. Now, how they did it in the old days is they used a combination of baking soda along with some vinegar and a toothbrush, and it works just absolutely great. Now there are some more modern ways to clean your battery. There are some battery cleaners that are put out in the market. You can get these at an automotive store or at a marine store. Or what you might want to do is invest in a little terminal cleaner. Like this one right here. It costs a couple of bucks, and basically how it works is you put it right over the terminal, go back and forth, and that cleans it. Now to get your connector, you would just use this brush right in here, and that does a nice job as well. And don't use a hammer to take the connection off, especially if it's frozen on there. What could happen is you could actually break the post inside the battery, and that's going to shorten the battery's life. Instead, what you might want to use is a terminal puller like this. Well, Sylvia, I hope that answered your question. And we're just about out of time, so our half hour is all used up. But how about if you do yourself one last favor? Until we see each other again, you try keeping your boat shipshape.
Funding for Shipshape TV has been provided by